Hello there, it's Paul here and welcome on everyone. I've been rummaging around the shed and went to my bottom shelf and just to look what wood I've got there, and it's probably wood that's been sat there for the last probably year, maybe 2 years. What I found is this lump of oak which I would have bought from my local yard, which was sold as firewood. It would have been totally wet at the time. I can see on this end I've got a crack running through here. I've got a crack running on the side here. I don't think that that crack runs too deep, but it does sort of go in that way, so it could be linked with the crack this end. Size wise, we're looking at about 10 inches by 8 inches by 4 inches thick. So the first thing I'm going to do is going to get this on the bandsaw first of all to start taking off the corners, so it hopefully gives me a little bit more of an insight of what's inside. This is what I started out with, and the first thing I did was take off these 2 corners, and it looked fairly promising. You can see where my bandsaw has really struggled on this. We've got a nice clean piece there anyway, no cracks other than this little piece at the top here, and again on this piece on the top here, and it just looked, hopefully you can see on there that the crack is just on the top there, nothing this side. So I then cut off this end to only find out that the crack has run right through the centre here, and by the looks of this we've got the pith here, and that's where that's gone from. So therefore I ended up with a slight crack on this end, but on this end you can see it's gone right through the centre. So I decided, right, I can't really do anything with that as a whole piece. So I decided to then cut this in half, which just took absolutely ages, and you can see here where the cracks come right through. Now I think there's still something I can get out of this lot. I hate throwing wood away when I can make something with it. So to start with, because these pieces, this end here has got the biggest majority of the wood without the crack, I think if I then now cut these that way, I've got a fairly big section here because the crack only comes at the top here. So that will be my basis of starting with, and I'm going to try and do a project where I use as much of this as possible. Got my first piece on the lathe now. I've sort of tried to take off 1 or 2 of the corners on the bandsaw, but it just takes so long to make a cut. So that's why I've gone with it as it is. As you can see, it's fairly well at a balance, and I'm just going to use, again, because we've got end grain and everything this way now, I'm going to use my large bowl gouge to try and true this up, and once I've got this trued up I'll then put either a tenon or a mortise on the bottom here, which will then be able to turn around and put on the chuck. There's a crack on here which I've just filled with CA and managed to get a few wood shavings in there. I don't know whether that's going to have an impact or not. First thing I'm going to do is just face off here to true this up as well, and then I may well go over this just to see what's happening. And I'm going to switch to my smaller bowl gouge now. been off and had me lunch, and after seeing what this has come up like, and I still have all of this wood to use, and I'm going to hope to use as much of this as possible, and I may even have to use some other pieces because I've decided to go back to the tea lights again. I'm going to get on, and this is going to be the first one, so I will hollow out as much of the inside as I can on here. But the tea light itself is probably going to be in another piece of wood, which will then insert either in the bottom or become like a base. So that's sort of really a design process as I go along. goes the end of that one then. That was all of a sudden an end to this part of the project. And even though I'm going to mark this down as a failure, it's not really a failure in some ways, because I've actually learned something from this. When you look at this of what's actually happened here, first of all, normally when you do spindle work, you've got your grain running that way. Now I've got side grain, so it's almost like a bowl format. So the first thing of all is that I'll put all these drill holes in here, and a lot of these, especially when you look at this piece which is actually blown out there, and on the other side which is blown out there, is where it's all end grain. Now the best way to imagine that is the way your grain is made up. Imagine a whole pile of little straws or even strands of spaghetti. So they're all interlinked together, laying on top of each other, which is what makes your grain up. Now if they're running that way, where I've blown this out so they're running straight through, you've got all these little end pieces going through, and where you've then drilled all the holes, it's actually weakened the whole structure of it. And that's really why it hasn't blown out on the sides here, because the grain is actually running across that way. So therefore the strands have actually got a lot more strength in them, even when you're drilling holes through them, because the surrounding strands all hold it together. It's the end of this part of the project and this part of the video, so it's more really a lesson that I've learnt. But I'm going to carry on, and it's been a couple of days since I actually had that blowout, and I've come back into the shed here, and I'm going to try and carry on using up all of this oak that I've got here. But at least this time, where I can see that the grain is running that way, I will turn it in a spindle format along that way for where I want to drill all the holes. Thanks a lot for watching.